why might I well not feel really hungry day after day when my calorie count is cut to less than 800 kilocalories a day?
Because you are going to become ketotic. And we have shown that even with 17% weight loss, massive, ghrelin does not increase for as long as a participant patient is ketotic. But then as soon as we start refeeding them and ketosis disappears, then ghrelin goes up and hunger feelings follow. That those individuals that lose less weight with an intervention, less lean mass, they do better in the long term in terms of weight loss maintenance compared with those that lost more lean mass.
Dr. Catia Martins, thank you so much for finding the time this afternoon for a chat. I'm indebted to you.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here.
I've got lots of questions that we want to ask, and I'm going to start off with this pretty straightforward, candid question, but I don't think the answer is necessarily easy. What happens physiologically to people when they try to lose weight?
Yeah, so if we think about the active weight loss phase, when people are in negative energy balance, then energy expenditure is going to go down because body weight is going to go down. And so the amount of energy that is needed to sustain basic functions, what we call resting energy expenditure, is going down, as well as the energy expenditure associated with deambulating, being it physical activity or exercise, particularly if the exercise is weight bearing, like walking or jogging, not so much with cycling. But so for sure, with weight loss, there is going to be a reduction in energy expenditure. And the magnitude of that reduction, of course, is going to depend on the changes in body composition that occur with weight loss. So the larger the loss of lean tissue, in particular skeletal muscle, the larger is going to be the reduction in energy expenditure.
So if I can interject, apologies, Katia, but we've got a problem straight off the bat there, haven't we? People are trying to lose weight by reducing, let's say, reduce the amount they eat. Okay, they're cutting their diet.
Yeah.
They reduce the amount they eat, and you're saying that actually, in synchrony with that, the body's requiring less energy. So it's kind of counteracting the fact that we're eating less.
Yes, but at the same time, you need to think that individuals with obesity have, in fact, a higher energy expenditure compared with normal weight, right? So it is expected that as a person loses weight, energy expenditure comes down to what would be expected at that lower body weight. And so the big discussion when it comes to the scientific community is if this reduction in energy expenditure is what would be expected or is greater than expected for that given loss of fat mass and fat-free mass. And so it's this difference between the measured and the expected reduction in energy expenditure with weight loss that we call metabolic adaptation or adaptive thermogenesis, which is a very
so actually, so you're saying that in fact, so you as people get smaller, basically, because they're eating less. Okay, so yes. To start with, they start to literally get smaller because their body's eating itself to some degree to make up for the calories that we're not giving it. So that the person is effectively getting smaller, and so everything else being equal, they need less energy. A smaller person has less tissue mass. But actually, some scientists suspect or think that they have measured, and maybe they have, a further reduction in energy expenditure by that person than would be predicted by their weight loss, suggesting that there's something more going on than just the person is getting smaller, that the body is somehow adapting.
Yes, fighting against. So that idea that the body, from a physiological perspective, fights against weight loss. That would be a mechanism against starvation. So, right? That would be the idea. Yeah.
Okay. And so because we know that people typically struggle to lose weight after a while. So to start with, weight seems to come off 2 kilograms seems quite common. Of course, it will vary, but 2 kilograms. And then it seems to stubbornly plateau.
Yeah.
And so the body, the person's body, kind of the person's physiology, perhaps is doing something, yeah, as you say, to defend against this. And it's not just that they are getting smaller, but that their body is kind of hunkering down, perhaps in an adaptive way, actually, to try and limit kind of the damage that it thinks is being done by the fact that suddenly less food is available.
Yes, correct. And so the evidence we have per today seems to point out that degree of metabolic adaptation depends on when the measurements are taken. So if we measure a person during active weight loss, so in negative energy balance, several studies report that in fact there is a difference between that measured and predicted. There is metabolic adaptation. But then if we repeat the measurements after a period of stabilization, then most of that difference disappears, which suggests that this is a mechanism that might limit the magnitude of weight loss. But per today, there is no evidence that it might be a risk factor for weight regain in the long term. So to give you just a couple of examples, my research group and others have shown that those individuals that experience more metabolic adaptation, they lose less weight and fat mass compared with those that experience less or no metabolic adaptation at all, and also that they take longer to reach their weight loss goals. So because we went back to that notion that over a certain period of time, at least some individuals struggle to continue losing weight, it seems that this mechanism might explain part of it.
Okay, so just to clarify, so there's this idea of metabolic adaptation where the body is kind of semi-hibernating almost, right, in an attempt to kind of need less energy in response to less energy being made available. The body's eating less, right? Okay, and some people will show more metabolic adaptation, more hunkering down, more down regulation than others. And those people that show more metabolic adaptation, their bodies are more stubborn to losing weight. So as the person diets, they experience less of a weight loss than people's bodies that show less, or in fact show no, I think, metabolic adaptation, which suggests that metabolic adaptation, is a thing. But it's hard to measure metabolic adaptation, I think, because there's a study, a John Speakman-backed study on mice, where you can really go to town on these animals, kind of measuring everything after sacrifice.
Yes.
And in that one study, it suggests that metabolic adaptation kind of disappears once you factor in changes in all the body organs, suggesting that we might think we're seeing metabolic adaptation in people, because actually we're not fully accounting for the sort of reduction in tissue mass in the person. We're only measuring certain elements of reduction in tissue mass. Whereas with these mice, because you can sacrifice them and then measure everything very, very carefully. Actually, once you factor that in, metabolic adaptation goes, and their drop in energy expenditure is purely, so this study claims, purely due to their loss of tissue mass as they become smaller.
I completely agree with you. So many research groups have really tried to account the changes that occur in body composition at the tissue and organ level. And when they do so, the more they account for, the less the metabolic adaptation is, right? Some people say that there is still some residual, and that residual is what is called mass independent metabolic adaptation. So we can think about metabolic adaptation being made by two components: a mass dependent, that potentially, if we account for everything to the level of tissue and organ mass, disappears, and another component that is mass independent. And that is the true metabolic adaptation. That is really the body going into an hibernation mode, as you mentioned before. And that would be accounted for a reduction in body temperature, a reduction in heart rate, a reduction in glomerular filtration rate, etc. But it's really minimal. Some people say that would be around 50 to 100 kilocalories, but not more than that.
Okay, so reduction in heart rate, reduction in kidney rates, various subtleties that might save the body 100 kilocalories a day. So that's 2 apples or 1 chocolate digested biscuit or cookie, if you like.
Yes.
So it's not a lot.
It's not a lot.
Can that really explain then the plateauing that most people, can I say that most people experience when they're on a diet, or indeed if they're on maybe they start to do some regular exercise to try and increase their energy requirements rather than decrease their energy intake. I think in both cases, you tend to get quite a quick plateau in terms of body weight. So can metabolic adaptation, can adaptive thermogenesis, as you say, can that really explain that phenomenon?
I think it can account for part of it, but I believe that most of the plateauing would be due to reduction in adherence to the intervention, being it reduced energy intake, increased energy expenditure through exercise, or a combination of both. And I can remember a couple of studies, maybe already 2 decades ago, that really tried to explain plateauing in weight loss. And they concluded that physiological adaptations could not explain the full plateauing. So it would be a combination of both metabolic adaptation and reduced adherence over time.
And there's 2 ways you could reduce adherence. I think one is, let's say someone's asked to cycle on a bicycle for 30 minutes every day and they don't, or they don't do it as hard. And the other thing is they're told to maybe maintain the diet they had before the exercise intervention started, right? So they've increased their energy expenditure by cycling on the bicycle every day, but they haven't increased their energy intake. And that's hard to do because, of course, exercise makes us feel hungry. And so they may reduce the amount of effort they're putting on or the frequency which they're doing the cycling, whilst at the same time probably sneaking in a bit more food. Sometimes they don't even realize it's happening. Honestly, people don't even realize it's happening half the time. They don't believe that they're taking on more calories, but somehow they find a way, and a fly on the wall would spot that. So I think that is true. And the problem with a lot of laboratory studies is that try and regulate and check food intake is that they're based on food diaries. So in other words, the participants fill in a diary to say what they've eaten that day. And there are a million ways in which they don't accurately, and almost always in an underestimating fashion, they don't accurately report what they've eaten. It can be self-delusion, it can be not realizing, it could be forgetting on purpose. So yeah, okay. So I think you're right. Behavioral factors have a big effect here on the plateauing of weight loss.
I believe so. I was just thinking, going back to your initial question on what happened to our body when we lose weight, correct? That is how we started. And I started talking about, the changes in energy expenditure. But then there is, of course, the other component about, appetite regulation. And what we know is that when people lose weight with lifestyle interventions, there is an upregulation in the secretion of ghrelin, that is a hunger hormone that makes us feel hungry. And most studies report that people feel more hungry. And this is very interesting because it can be seen again as the body fighting back against weight loss and trying to bring body weight back to its original state. However, as with our discussion with metabolic adaptation, I have done many years ago a study where we tried to compare reduced obese individuals. So they had lost, in fact, a large amount, 15% of body weight, and maintained it for at least 1 year. And then we recruited a control group that had never lost weight, and we tried to match as good as we could in terms of body weight, body composition, sex, balance, age, etc. And then we measured different appetite markers, appetite sensations, etc. And there was no difference in the plasma concentration of ghrelin or hunger feelings between these 2 groups. Again, suggesting that yes, there is an increase in ghrelin, there is an increase in hunger. But then again, if you compare individuals with obesity with normal weights, individuals with obesity have lower ghrelin, not the other way around. And this is because, ghrelin is an inverse adiposity signal. So the higher the BMI, the higher the fat mass, the lower is the ghrelin. And so you would expect that as a person loses weight and, comes down to either it is overweight, normal weight, it doesn't matter. If you compare them with a BMI match control, then you don't find any differences. So there is a normalization, it seems, both in terms of energy expenditure and in terms of appetite regulation with weight loss.
Is there, do you think, a kind of elastic band sort of approach that can be taken to weight loss? So what I mean by that is, or to beating weight regain. What I mean by this is, someone loses weight, and very often we find that they regain that weight over time. And it seems that, through various mechanisms, the body's very good at saying, right, we're going to get this weight back on. It's hard to beat the gnawing sensation of hunger for very long. But I wonder whether that set point that the body kind of wants to get back to changes in the end. I'm not saying it does, but I wonder if it does. So that in the immediate, the body is thinking, we're talking over weeks here. Gosh, I've lost 2 or 3 kilos. I don't want to lose that weight. I'm going to encourage myself to eat more, as it were, to put that weight back on. And often people do. But if enough time goes by, the elastic band snaps and the body now loses interest in what it used to think was its body weight set point and accepts a new normal, to coin the phrase. And so that kind of drive by the body to return to that previous weight goes. I mean, is there anything in that? Is that wishful thinking from me?
Yes, it is. And it's an amazing question that I don't know the full answer. If we think about the National Weight Loss Control Register in the US that has followed a group of successful weight loss individuals over many, many years, they try to identify, predictors of successful weight loss, maintenance. And the only thing they could find was that the longer they maintained their weight loss, the easier it got over time. Right? Now, if that is physiology, so getting used to the increased hunger, the reduced energy expenditure, or if it is behavioral, I think it's a combination. But, from my understanding, and up to now, nobody has been able to show me evidence otherwise, but I'm open to change. Nobody has really identified a physiological predictor of weight regain. What I mean is, when people lose weight, there is a reduction in energy expenditure. Maybe there is metabolic adaptation, depends on when you measure it, how you measure it, etc. But even those studies that have identified metabolic adaptation, including the Biggest Loser competition in the US that has measured a metabolic adaptation of more than 500 kilocalories after 6 years. I'm not going to go into the details about why I think those numbers might not be correct. But anyway, the author concluded that the amount of metabolic adaptation after weight loss was not a predictor of weight regain. If you look into appetite, and I have also published this work, the increase in hunger, the increase in hunger, the increase in ghrelin. We also looked into changes in other appetite hormones such as glucose, like peptide 1, the GLP-1, peptide YY, cholecystokinin. We couldn't find any association between changes in appetite with weight loss and weight regain at 1 year follow-up. Even in the landmark paper by Sumitran, was done in Australia, generated a very hot discussion because she showed that this increase in ghrelin and hunger that occur with weight loss is still there 1 year later, even though they regained most of the weight. But if you go into the supplementary materials, they could not find a single association between any change in any appetite marker with weight loss and weight regain in the long term. So from my knowledge, I do not know of any physiological predictor of weight regain.
Which might suggest that then it's a behavioral issue. So, for example, people change their diet or increase exercise or whatever it is, lose weight, and then most people early on sort of return to what they like or they think they like or whatever, which is less exercise and eating more or eating a different diet. And those people that are able to more maintain what they were doing, so keep exercising and keep with the new diet or whatever, well, once they've done that for a while, it becomes part of their new kind of lifestyle. They're used to walking to work rather than driving to work, or they're used to going to the gym with their friend on Wednesdays and Fridays, or they're used to frying vegetables, or I don't know, boiling vegetables, sorry, rather than frying meat or whatever it is. And it just becomes who they are. And so the weight stays off. And these are behavioral changes rather than that their physiology is kind of settling down and adjusting and the ghrelin levels are dropping and whatever. It's more the form of behavioral changes than physiological. It is one possibility based on what you're saying is the case with the literature.
Well, I'm not saying that that physiology is not involved. I believe it plays a role, a minor, not a major role. But I don't think we have come to a stage where they have been identified, at least at the level that we are, talking about today.
Am I right in saying you're an advocate of the ketogenic diet to support weight loss and control?
No, I think the ketogenic diet is a tool. It's a tool inside the toolbox that can be used and might be beneficial, particularly in individuals that struggle to adhere to an energy-restricted diet because they feel too hungry. So what I have shown is that when people lose weight with ketogenic diets, and ketogenic diet is a very broad term, I will come back to it later, their ghrelin stays at baseline values. And we have shown that even with 17% weight loss, massive, ghrelin does not increase for as long as a participant patient is ketotic. But then as soon as we start refeeding them and ketosis disappears, then ghrelin goes up and hunger feelings follow. So again, I do not suggest that the ketogenic diet is the best diet out there. No, I think there are many diets that can work to different people at different stages. But a ketogenic diet has the benefit of not upregulating ghrelin secretion and hunger.
What are the disadvantages then, do you think, potentially of a ketogenic diet?
Well, let's go back to the definition of what a ketogenic diet is. Because, ketosis can be achieved in many different ways. It can be achieved with fasting. It can be achieved with a very low energy diet, so a diet that provides less than 800 kilocalories per day. And most of my research has been done in that setting. So it's not the traditional high fat, very low carbohydrate, but because the diet provided so little energy, individuals went into ketosis. So ketosis can, again, going back, be achieved by fasting, starvation, a very low energy diet, a low energy diet with a low amount of carbohydrates, or a diet that matches the energy needs, so eukalotic, with very low amount of carbohydrates.
And could that sorry,
yes.
Katia, but you mind cutting that? Brilliant. Yeah, okay. And thinking about an isocaloric diet, so one where basically you're eating a full number of calories, whatever that is for that individual person, 2,000, 3,000 calories a day, kilocalories a day, they could generate a ketogenic diet. In other words, a diet where the body is predominantly using ketone bodies as opposed to glucose for sort of primary energy source. They could be doing that, and they would achieve that through a high fat, very low carb diet. Just as an aside, well, not an aside, but part of this, I'm interested to know whether what's called the carnivore diet, so basically eating an awful lot of meat, maybe a teeny bit of fruit or something, certainly no vegetables, heaven forbid, and very few sort of carbs, would the carnivore diet, if done fully, be recognized as a ketogenic diet?
Yes.
Okay.
Usually the definition of a ketogenic diet is a diet that induces ketosis, and diet-induced ketosis is defined as BHP in the plasma above 0.5. Some say 0.3, but most 0.5. So everything above that is ketosis.
Okay. So we've got as you were explaining, sorry, a wide array of possibilities for generating a state of ketosis in the body. And in that situation, typically, people could be under eating in terms of they're creating a negative energy balance. They could be. And they're less likely to feel so hungry in that situation than if they were eating a non-ketogenic diet. And therefore, a ketogenic diet could, for some people at least, be a way to lose weight and potentially keep that weight off.
Possibility, yes.
But you would say it's not the ideal diet?
I don't think we have enough evidence per today to evaluate the safety of ketogenic diets in the long term. There are some concerns, particularly in relation to lipid metabolism and increased, LDL cholesterol. But I don't think we have enough evidence to really say if they can be followed in the long term or not. In saying that, sorry, I cut you. In saying that, there are a couple of studies, I'm thinking here in the US, of companies that provide ketogenic diets via telehealth that have, shown that individuals are able to improve their glucose metabolism. So it's used a lot in patients with type 2 diabetes, or outside of diabetes control, are able to lose and maintain weight loss with these types of diets for 1 to 3 years without significant negative effects.
So it's a pretty long-term studies.
Yes.
And I'm trying to think now, there's a case study of an international rugby player on a ketogenic diet who seemed to do very well. Of course, it's nigh on anecdote when it's a sample size of one, and that there are other individuals who feel strongly that there's value to it. So sometimes it's associated with a belief, rightly or wrongly, that we are innate carnivores as opposed really to omnivores. This gets into an interesting area that, as it overlaps. I guess the attractions for some people feel better on a ketogenic and/or a carnivore diet. And I think a couple of things could be going on there, and no doubt other things as well. But two things spring to mind. One is what you've mentioned, that people feel satiated, and that feels good. They're not eating that much. Maybe they see they're losing some weight and they want that, and they feel satiated. So that kind of seems to make sense to them, and I have some sympathy with that. The other thing is that they're off the carbs, they're off the wheat. And I think quite a lot of people, to some degree or another, just don't digest wheat that well. Now, some people have a very clear problem with it, but I think a lot of people have a subtle problem with it. And so it may be as much about not eating wheat-based products and, as much as specifically eating lots of meat and fat.
Yes. I think there is also some evidence that cutting on simple sugars reduces, for example, cravings. So it may also be related with that. Of course, ketogenic diets are high in protein, and protein is more satiating than other macronutrients. So again, that can also explain, particularly the fact that ad libitum ketogenic diets produce weight loss. I mean, people can theoretically eat whatever they want within that given, dietary prescription and still lose weight. And I believe the reason is because first, the food options are very limited. So people tend to get, tired and bored of the food, right? Because it's so limited. And the second part is because it is a high protein, induces more satiety, and they don't feel hungry anyway because their ghrelin is downregulated. So several things, I think, contribute to that.
So your point about the boredom of the diet, beg your pardon, is that for people on the ketogenic diet or off the ketogenic diet?
Sorry, can you repeat?
In terms of feeling bored about their diet, I mean, my thought would be someone on a ketogenic diet might find it limiting after a while because, I mean, it's purposefully limiting. So they might struggle to maintain that diet over time, depending on their tastes. They might appreciate the satiation and other things that it affords, but may wander from the diet because there's all these other wonderful flavors out there.
For sure.
So, Catia, if you were advising somebody, and maybe you don't want to do this, but if you were forced to advise someone on how through their diet, well, actually, we can combine this with exercise. Maybe they're doing exercise, maybe they're not. I don't know if that affects your answer. Someone's trying to lose weight, and obviously they want to lose weight and then they want to keep the weight off. Now, this isn't easy. We've discussed that it's not easy for a number of reasons, but what would you advise them to do to give them the best shot at achieving that?
Well, my background is dietetics, so I'm a registered dietitian by training. So I would potentially, try to get a diet history, understand what the people eat, what the person eats. Has that person tried to lose weight before? What have they tried? Did it work? Did it not work? And try to find something that the person feels it can stick with for some time. So when it comes to, evidence-based, in terms of types of diets, from low fat to low carb, intermittent, vegan, carnivore, you name it. What we know is that the diet that the person can adhere to is the diet that the person is going to be successful. So there is not one diet that will fit everyone. I don't believe on it. I believe that for some people, low fat might work. For others, a ketogenic diet might work, etc., etc. But at the end, the question is, what dietary approach do you feel you can stick with, you can adhere to in the long term? And I think the same applies with exercise. A person can go to the gym, start a new exercise program, go to the gym 5 times per week for 1 hour. And, that can help lose weight, no doubt. It's not the main driver. It's a dietary restriction that is the main driver during the active weight loss phase, but it can help. But then the question again is, can that person after 3-6 months continue going to the gym 5 times per week for 1 hour? Probably the average person cannot. And so maybe again at the beginning, asking the person, let's try to find an exercise program that you think you can maintain, not for 3 or 6 months, but you can maintain for the rest of your life.
Well, okay. And so I absolutely agree. I think that's a very important point, that there's lots of variety in people in terms of their proclivities, their preferences, their motivations. And so it isn't the case that one diet fits all or one exercise regime fits all at all. And in fact, some people may simply eschew the exercise regime entirely. It's just not their cup of tea. Although maybe most people can find something enjoyable if they do it, assuming they can. But anyway, but in terms of diet, yes, I absolutely agree. Again, it's got to be something that can work for them. Within that, would you say that a ketogenic diet could be valuable because it's more likely that that person doesn't feel so hungry when they're in a calorie deficit up to a point? I guess a ketogenic diet can be fairly varied, and maybe there's an argument to say, you can step outside that occasionally on Sundays, or I don't know. Of course, you don't want it to spread from Sundays, but maybe, once a week, then you can eat what you want so you don't feel you're entirely missing out. Trying to maintain the exercise. And you say a high protein diet, which is ketogenic, but specifically high protein also seems to be satiatory.
Yes, for sure. I was just going to add, trying to answer your question. I think a ketogenic diet is particularly relevant during the weight loss phase. If it's beneficial, safe or not in the long term, I think we have not reached that conclusion yet, but I see it as a valuable tool during the weight loss phase. And I just wanted to bring another paper that came to my mind by Purcell, again, a study done in Australia back in 2011, where they try to answer this question: what is it easier and is associated with better long-term outcomes? To lose weight gradually over time with a low energy diet, lower energy restriction, or to lose the same amount of weight over a shorter period of time with a very low energy diet that is also ketogenic. And they couldn't find any differences in terms of changes in body composition. They could not find any differences in terms of weight regain up to 2 years. Of course, then, after an initial, the aim was for the participants to lose 15% of their body weight, either slowly over, I think it was a 3 or 6 months period, or rapidly over, I think, 8 or 12 weeks. And then they, of course, had, a weight maintenance phase. But so they couldn't find any difference in weight regain after 2 years. But what they found was that a larger proportion of participants in the fast weight loss group were able to finish and to achieve 15% weight loss compared with the gradual weight loss group. And I think the reason for that is twofold. Again, first, they didn't feel hungry, and that helped them keep going. And second, they saw results faster. And that in itself is a motivation to keep going, right? If I am in a 500 kilocalorie energy restricted diet and I lose 1 pound per week, it's not bad if it is sustained, but it's so small. You almost can't see it in the scale. But if you are doing a very low energy diet, maybe you lose 3, 4, even 5 pounds in 1 week, particularly during the initial 2 weeks, because you are also losing a lot of water. But anyway, seeing results in the scale is important to motivate the person to continue doing the diet, I believe.
Is there anything else around weight loss and weight regain, any major factors that we haven't touched on this afternoon?
We touched briefly, but we can go back to it, is the loss of lean mass. So I have published some studies showing that those individuals that lose less weight with an intervention, less lean mass, they do better in the long term in terms of weight loss maintenance compared with those that lost more lean mass. And of course, we know that is probably, there are many factors, but one of them is that those individuals that lost less lean mass, they also experience a smaller reduction in energy expenditure, right? And so the energy restriction that they need to do to maintain that weight loss is smaller. They can have a more flexible diet, right? Particularly if then they couple that with exercise. But so it seems that fat-free mass preservation or skeletal muscle preservation is really important during the weight loss phase for that reason, if we want to maximize then the results in the long term. And then probably the question is, okay, so how we achieve that? Increasing the amount of protein in the diet. So again, going back to the high protein diet seems to have an impact. And then, of course, resistance training.
Right. So yes, that's interesting. So there could be value in resistance training, not so much for burning calories and increasing energy expenditure, but to encourage the body to maintain its muscle mass while it's losing weight. Okay. Yeah. And resistance training tends to be relatively static. It's lifting weights with targeted muscles, which is a different sort of exercise. I guess some people like that. Some people like aerobic exercise. Some people like both, but they're more likely to do it if they know can be beneficial to them, and maybe if they can do it at home watching a YouTube video or something.
Makes it
a bit more viable than it once was.
Exactly.
And if they have someone to do it with, I think can help. But some people do, and some people don't have that option. Katia, you're very prolific in this area of research. I've been studying your Google Scholar page for some time now.
Oh, you didn't tell me that at the beginning.
Oh, I've done my research. The things I've discovered. Where can people find more Katia?
Find more about
you and your work?
Well, they can Google my name in association with University of Alabama in Birmingham. They can see, which a couple of recent publications and what I'm doing at the moment. They can go to PubMed if they have access to it, and also Google my name. And I think I have done a little bit of research in different fields that people can, find something that they can relate to, being it exercise, both aerobic and resistance training, diets, different types of diets, very low energy diets, low energy diets. So I think I have an interesting portfolio.
You do indeed. I actually and when you list that, I do have another question for you actually, which is, how well can people adhere to a very low calorie diet? In other words, what's very low? Certainly less than 1,000 calories a day. Yes. So you've worked in that area. How viable is that for people typically to adhere to it? And how long do they keep it up?
So a very low energy diet is defined as less than 800 kilocalories per day. And I have done a couple of studies with specifically very low energy diets. Very low energy diets were never designed with the aim of people using them in the long term. They are tools to be used in the short term, usually for 8 to 12 weeks. Most of the studies have done maximum 12 weeks. They could be done for longer, but if a person adheres to a very low energy diet for 8 weeks, and we are talking about individuals with a BMI above 30, so individuals with obesity, they can easily lose 10% of their body weight. Most people, 15% of their body weight. Going back to your question, how easy it is to adhere to it, my experience is that it is relatively easy. And again, the reason is twofold. They don't feel hungry because they are ketotic, because their ghrelin is sustained at baseline values, and because they don't have to think about what they are going to eat, what they are going to prepare. Because, for a person to be able to have all the macro and micronutrients, very low energy diets need to be delivered as meal replacements. So we are talking about shakes, soups, cereal bars, Nowadays, there are even meals, being it, for example, spaghetti bolognese or oats or pancakes. There is a very large portfolio of products that can be used. But anyway, the person knows what he or she can eat. It's usually 5 products, 5 to 6 products per day. Some companies allow for a dinner with real food, but again, it would be, meat, fish, and then some vegetables, so low in carbohydrates. I can tell you that in a study that we did back in Norway with 100 participants, I would say that less than 5% were not able to stick to the program due to gastrointestinal side effects. So diarrhea, vomiting, abdominal discomfort. Then there is a subgroup of individuals that will experience what is known the keto flu. So it's an array of symptoms from headache to hypotension to nausea, but they usually tend to go away, within one week. And there are strategies that we can use to try to minimize those symptoms, particularly in terms of hydration and electrolytes and so on. So I think it is very feasible to be on a very low energy diet for a short period of time. And that is exactly the aim, is to induce significant weight loss over a short period of time. And then the strategies to maintain that weight in the long term need to change. So more and more, we see weight loss and weight loss maintenance as 2 completely different processes.
Now, sorry, last thing, I think I must have missed this a little bit. Can you just explain again a little bit about, my I mean, I feel sweaty almost thinking about the idea of having a very low dietary intake day after day after day. I think it would be horrendous for me. No, maybe it wouldn't be. Again, why might I well not feel really hungry day after day when my calorie count is cut to less than 800 kilocalories a day?
Because you are going to become ketotic. And as soon as you are ketotic, you feel a state of fullness. We don't exactly know why this is happening. I have done a couple of studies trying to understand, why ghrelin does not increase, why hunger does not increase. And it seems really to be driven by beta-hydroxybutyrate. So one of the ketone bodies that circulates in the plasma, the main one is beta-hydroxybutyrate. And what we found was that the more ketotic a person is, the lower is the increase in ghrelin and hunger, really showing that the appetite suppression is done through BHB. Exactly how, I don't know, but we know that BHB is able to cross the blood-brain barrier. And so it potentially acts, in different brain centers involved in appetite regulation. I don't know exactly, but it's mediated by BHB.
But then that seems to break an obvious adaptation of the body, which is, the release of ghrelin to make us feel hungry in response to not eating enough. Are your participants, when they're going on these very low calorie diets, is it the case that the calories that they're able to eat, or the calories representing the food that they're eating, are of a ketogenic nature? In other words, high protein, high fat, low carbohydrates. So it's not just that they're eating a low amount, but on top of that, they're eating relatively few carbohydrates, which really pushes the ketogenic nature of their diet. Right. So it could be that people who cut their dietary intake dramatically, but that diet, that the food that they're still eating, albeit it's much reduced, has quite a large composition of carbohydrates, that you would anticipate they might feel quite hungry from that and struggle.
In terms of absolute amount of energy, is very little. It's 800 kilocalories. Amount of carbohydrates is usually around 55 to 70 grams. So it's not so little, right? But because the amount of energy is so little, then it is easier to go into ketosis. Just to give an idea, if we are talking about low caloric diet to match our energy needs and we want to induce ketosis, usually we need less than 20 grams of carbohydrates to induce ketosis with that amount of energy. And there are several reasons for that. One of them is that some amino acids can also be converted into, in terms of, the glucogenic pathway. And so because more glucose can be produced out of some amino acids, it is harder to get into ketosis. Okay. Right? And that is why we need to go so low in a diet that provides a lot of energy. Did I answer your question?
Well, I think so. I suppose yes, it's a complicated area. It just I don't think, from what you're saying, you sense that to some degree, regardless of diet, a very low diet will produce ketogenesis to some degree, and that suppresses ghrelin levels. Fine. And that's a very positive story for people who are looking for perhaps particularly rapid weight loss. But that would go against expectations that the body is seeking to make itself feel hungry when it doesn't have much to eat. To put it another way, you might be saying, or you might anticipate that if people cut their dietary intake a bit, then they feel hungry. If they cut it even more, they don't feel hungry. Okay, one might expect as an evolutionary adaptation that the more we cut our diet, the hungrier we feel. So maybe cutting the diet to a really low amount, at least for a couple of weeks. I mean, maybe beyond that things change, fair enough. But at least for a couple of weeks, it's such a low diet, it kind of befuddles or circumvents the body's hunger mechanisms. Okay.
It might be. And again, if we think about, evolution, and I know very little in that field, but, we have gone through periods of famine, correct? And famine for sure would induce ketosis. And that potentially helped people, keep going, because hunger is such a strong, painful sensation, if we think about it, right? So maybe we can think of it as more of an evolutionary adaptation to periods of famine.
Yes, an ability to maintain focus maybe during a period where the body might think evidently there's really not much food around because I'm not eating much food and therefore but I still need to be able to operate effectively and keep myself together to create situations where there are more food. I mean, maybe it's an unusual relationship, a sort of a U-shaped relationship potentially between amount of dieting and an amount of sensation of hunger and indeed ghrelin pushing around the body. Wow. Well, super interesting, and a very sort of positive final note there, that in a sense, if someone wants to diet, really, really diet, I mean, really go for it, and you might actually find it a bit easier than subtly dieting. Actually, I do think that's right. People try, and we've all been there, haven't we? People trying to cut out a few hundred kilocalories. We might not quantify it, but we're trying to just eat a bit less, not have dessert, have a smaller lunch or whatever it is. It's just very hard, because even if you manage it for 1 or 2 meals, you wake up hungry the next day, and you have that extra piece of toast, and the body's conniving, it's cunning, right? And somehow over the course of, let's say, a week, your body makes you hungry enough that you end up making those calories back up. So maybe if you go for it, you've got to really, really go for it and actually come out the other side, as it were, and it's actually somewhat more viable to do. Well, look,
I think so. I think we have reasonably good strategies to induce weight loss in a safe way and in an amount that brings in clinical relevant outcomes in terms of reduction in the risk of developing several diseases. I think the challenge is in the long term maintaining that weight loss. I think we are still not there.
Katia, thank you very much for your time this afternoon.
It was such a pleasure to have this discussion with you. Amazing. Thank you.